Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to Dave Richard Gallery. This is our third set of artist talks for the exhibition History, Her Story. And many of you, there's some faces here, and I know we have visitors from Oklahoma, so thank you for coming. That was nice. And so anyway, this exhibition was put together by Dave Richard Gallery. I'm David, and Richard's manning the cameras. And the New Mexico State Committee, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, long title. But anyhow, their president will be giving just a little comment here in a second here, so I won't take up, because I don't know what she's going to say and I don't want to repeat her. But anyway, so the exhibition is a focus on photography, and more specifically on women photographers in New Mexico. And the focus of the work, though, in particular in terms of selecting and curating this exhibition, were artists whose work addresses social, cultural, and environmental changes. So sort of revealing and exposing different things socially, culturally, and environmentally, and using photography as a tool to try and bring awareness to people and affect change. So tonight, we're having three of the artists who are actually in this room that you see behind you are Cara Romero, who's on the end here. And then we have Abbey Hepner. Her work is in the other room. It's environmental work. And then this is Jessamyn Lovell, whose work's very interesting, dealing with sort of detective work and identity theft. And we're very fortunate to have Kate Ware here with us tonight to moderate this talk. And she's with the New Mexico Museum of Art and curator of photography. So I'm going to let her handle how she wants to do introductions with the panel. And then right now we have Ava Lawrence, president of the Women's Committee, National Museum of the Arts. So you guys have so many different versions, I figured I just reverted back to the one I knew 2 years ago.
Thank you, David.
No problem.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you all for coming, and especially thank you to our panel. We're thrilled. I can't believe that this is our last panel. Hasn't the time gone so quickly? I mean, we've been so full of wonderful events, and most exciting, or very exciting, Richard told me the other day that we have reached approximately 2 million people between all our various technologies and panels, and so much, even more famous than before. And I want to thank our committee, of course, who has worked so hard on this entire thing, and Frey and Barbara Bloomberg, who's hiding back there. And I just want to read you a very short note from one of the other artists that you may have heard last week. And this is Lori Toomer. Her exhibition is in the other room. And she said, "Thank you all for the work you did to make History, Her Story happen. I'm so honored to be part of this literally radioactive event." I love the space and how beautifully the show was arranged by David, Richard, and by the committee. We've all had a wonderful time with this. I love the uniqueness of each participant's work, and I think that you have to agree it is so diverse in theme, in everything. I think it's just been so fantastic. I've never seen a show with this degree of cultural diversity, and it is for me noteworthy and so appreciated. I love the fabulous catalog. There's still many more there. Please help yourselves and take many home with you. And the junior staff created. Just wow. I'm loving the amazing panels and the videotaping to make these available online. For me, this is so wonderful because I'm unable to be here in person for all of the events. The last time I left my home was for my panel. That was for last week. I rarely leave home due to chronic pain from MS. And I love that you're involved in the efforts to make New Mexico women artists seen and heard.
story before we start.
Yes, hi Lori. This is on Facebook Live, streaming live, so I'm sure she's watching. So anyway, turn over to you, Kate.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you, Ava, and I especially want to thank the committee and particularly Anne and Barbara for putting together such a dynamic group of artists and finding such great talent here in New Mexico. And I realize I probably did not turn off my phone, but I will remind the rest of you to do so if you haven't already. Welcome, and it's great to have you here. Tonight's panel discussion will be with the three artists that David named, and you see their work on the walls around you from 3 different series. They have other bodies of work, of course. I'm on the non-commercial side of the art world, being at the museum, but I do want to remind you, you'll see some red dots in the gallery, and that means that someone has chosen to take one of the pictures home, and that's something that you can do too to help support the gallery and help support the artists, and that's an important part of our ecosystem. I just wanted to put that out there as well. So I'm going to start out with a few questions for each of the artists and let them talk at length individually, and as well as having discussion among us. And then, of course, at the end, we'd be very interested in hearing your questions and comments. So if you'll just jot a note or save the thought until the end, that would be really terrific. So, shall we? Shall we away? I wanted to start with the title of the show, History, Her Story. And in the catalog, there's some text that talks about the importance of each artist's life and life experience and ancestry and cultural life as contributing to the art that she makes. That's true for some artists and sometimes not for others, but I thought I'd love to hear from each of you about how your life journey and your life experience led you to do the body of work that is here, because I know that each of you has a story. So, Cara, would you like to begin?
Sure, so a little bit about my personal life history and how it fits into the work.
Yeah, what motivated you to do these pictures of these very powerful women?
Oh, okay. So I was born and raised in California and specifically moved to our Indian reservation. My father's Native American, my mom's non-Native, which is in Mojave Desert, California. I'm from the Chemehuevi Indian tribe, in the heart of the Mojave along the Colorado River. And most of the photographs that you see in this series are friends and family. And we come from a tribe where there is a lot of gender equity. Our creator is a woman. And so we have this inherent strength. The women were a female-dominated government, historically went into battle with the men, and just a really tough, beautiful group of women. Simultaneously, photography is a male-dominated, non-native medium, and I think it's a really subtle but really powerful shift for women to be behind the camera. And the series of women that I began, the series began with figuratives, and I really wanted to kind of take back the vantage point of a woman, create something that was very maternal between myself and the Native females that I was depicting. And I think it comes across as both empowering, as opposed to a lot of the objectification that you'll see in other photography of Native women, especially if it's done by a man. I think that you'll find some of that supernaturalness, that's indigenous worldview in my photography. So some of them speak to archetypes, some of them speak to mythology, and some of them are very editorial and documentary, really about each individual woman and who they are. None of them are depicted in any way that's that far from their personality. And there's an interview process involved with my friends and my family and the models and subjects that I choose to photograph. And I think that all plays out really well. So again, it's an Indigenous worldview, it's a female empowerment, is kind of the emphasis and the focus on what I'm producing. And that's to really combat objectification of Native women. It's to really combat lowbrow stuff that's out there, and yeah, really empower the Native women that I'm depicting.
Did you see it as a corrective, as something that you really needed to put out into the world to make up for other images that were out there, or was it more that it's something that you really
It
wanted
was
to express?
definitely a call and response
Mhm.
to things that I was seeing not only from male photographers, but also in a lot of cultural appropriation. I found that it was something that was missing within our own community. And so yeah, definitely a call and response is something that I felt hadn't been done or hadn't been done well.
Well, Abbey, your series Transuranic is on view next door, and that is something that the photographs that you use are of places that bring their nuclear waste to New Mexico. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you get started with that?
Well, the series is every photograph in the western U.S. that ships radioactive waste here to New Mexico. And I think sometimes in my work it's difficult to see a really personal connection. I tend to lean towards kind of socio-cultural or political work. And that's actually very much coming from a place, maybe an attempt to ground myself. I don't have much family history. My father was adopted under really quite difficult circumstances. And then on my mother's side, her mother died when she was 24, and her brother died also at 24, and then my aunt and uncle died really young as well. And they're kind of like strange family secrets, but my family did grow up in Utah. They were downwinders.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so
maybe we should explain for the viewing audience in case they may not know what a downwinder is.
Yeah, so they lived basically in a region that was exposed from all of the nuclear tests at the Nevada test site. So my grandma in her 24 years of age would have experienced in some way 124 nuclear tests that were done at Nevada test site. And the majority of those being while she was pregnant or with young children, my mother, aunt, and uncle. And that's sort of like my extent of knowledge of my family history, is not really understanding these things that I've inherited. However, I have this place as a location that I know connects me in some way to this. And it's likely that, in some way, some kind of hereditary things that I have experienced, maybe it came from that. Certainly, I can trace back to my grandparents. Osteochondroma, like when I was younger, I had bone tumors. Yeah, and so, broke the But it's a weird sort of underlying health and fragility. It's always been present in my work. I have a hard time talking to people about it because I don't really know that much of my own history. And so I'm very grounded in place and trying to understand place. And when I came to New Mexico, it was actually after living in Japan and volunteering in the disaster zone that was left from the 2011 tsunami and nuclear meltdown. And after that experience, and I had done some projects on nuclear issues prior to that, but after that experience, things were really heightened, my questions. And being in New Mexico, where I felt I had a deep community and a very rich love for a place, I started asking, well, what is the nuclear history here? What's happening here in the places that I live by, that I drive by? And so I set out to make this project, photographing all of these places that ship hundreds of thousands of gallons of radioactive waste. They drive across the country. to come here to New Mexico to be buried. And when I set out to go to these places to photograph them, the thing that I really noted, and there's 13 sites in total, is their kind of banality. They're, places that we drive by, often they're fenced in, they're supposed to be unremarkable. And to me, there was something about that was really startling, that I didn't go and feel some great sense of fear, but I could drive through neighborhoods that people lived by, that decades and decades of exposure through soil, through water, through other events like fires at Rocky Flats. And there was something in that kind of banality. And I think that's what's troubling in a way. I think often the biggest evils penetrate a society. The biggest evils are banal. We become used to them. We don't question them anymore. And so I photographed all of these places, and then I turned them into uranotypes. And a uranotype is an archaic photographic process. I didn't make it up. It was invented in 1858. It uses uranyl nitrate. It's basically uranium instead of silver in the photographic process. So uranyl nitrate is hand painted onto paper, and it is placed in a UV box with, I use a digital negative, and they're about 40-minute long exposures. You have to wear gloves, you have to protect your clothing, and you want to work with it in liquid form to eliminate any kind of inhalation risk. And once they go through the entire process and are developed and clean, they're fine to handle. I don't, because it gives me the heebie-jeebies. They're fine to be around, but you don't want to eat them. So, hence the locked box in here. And they emit, they'll read about 200 counts per minute. That reads more than a banana, more than a Brazil nut, but less than most clay, shale, and brick that you will find here in New Mexico or in Colorado, where we're at high elevation and we have rich exposed soil. But it's effective enough, I feel, to kind of take a place that's banal and give people a reminder of the toxicity that exists in that. And I'm trying to play with that fear a little bit. And for me, in making, the last thing I'll say about this, in making this process, I knew that it needed to be this process. When I was living in Japan, I was doing a lot of research on uranium, knowing that I was coming to New Mexico. And I found a photograph, a very, very rare photograph of a uranotype, because it's a very rare process. I found one online and I shared it with one of my fellow Japanese volunteers. And she shared this photograph of a uranotype with her grandmother, who told her that the color of the uranotype looked like the color of the sky after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Wow.
And that haunted me. And when I went to Los Alamos National Labs, and I stood above the hill and I looked at that place where that bomb was made, I thought, I have to give the sky the color of that bomb, and I have to make work that's both quiet and threatening.
Abby, what drove you to go and be a volunteer in Japan? Or was that important to you?
Well, prior to that, I had done a body of work in Germany when the plants were being shut down. And I was very interested in the landscape. What does the landscape become? It becomes this kind of scar after they close the nuclear plants. It's still dangerous. And I was interested in that. I had a lot of friends in the nuclear industry, great privilege and access to ask questions. And I believed when I went to Germany that I was going to go there and I was going to find that they were closing nuclear plants and opening coal plants. And I was scratching my head thinking, don't they know about global warming? And this wasn't true. It wasn't true. Of course, we know Germany has like an incredible, alternative energy going on. And I knew at that moment that like everything I had kind of believed about this was wrong. And I needed to understand for myself. I didn't feel like it was right to continue the work that I was making without volunteering and understanding. And I actually went to Japan. My husband randomly had a job that was there at the Navy base, and he worked on nuclear submarines. And when I was there and studying connections between the U.S. Nuclear history and Japanese nuclear history, and the fact that Eisenhower's 1953 Atoms for Peace program as a kind of peaceful gratitude, an apology in some sense, gave Japan the money and the means to build their own nuclear industry. In fact, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was built by GE and Westinghouse. So
But you really
that
wanted
history
first-hand
matters.
experience.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
I wanted to understand. And I felt that it was a part of my history in a way, and that it was important that I try to do something about it or understand something about it.
And Jessie, your series that's on view is No Trespassing, isn't it right? And
Yeah.
And it's an installation in the gallery next door. And what life experiences led you to create that body of work?
Well, all of them. All of the life experiences. So it isn't something that I really come to understand until pretty recently. The influence that my relationship, ups and downs and estrangement ultimately with my father, had that impacted the work greatly. And I didn't totally understand like the degree, but when I think back and when I've done, sort of completed the no trespassing. So to explain something, DIY PI, do-it-yourself private investigation, is a project I've been working on for, I could say technically for 1.5 years, because I didn't come up with the idea until 1.5 years ago to pursue my private investigator's license as an art piece, and a real thing. But in truth, I've been working on this project for about 5, 6, maybe even 7 years total, depending on how technical we're going to get with recording it and all that. Because the hours I work towards the license have to fall within a 5-year span. So 5 years, let's just say 5 years for the record. But that includes the project about my father. And so No Trespassing is a search and sort of exploration of my relationship with my estranged father until his passing in about a month before my son was born. So he passed away at 60 pretty unexpectedly after I had explored this project, and he had tried to reach out to me after finding out about this project, and then I didn't return the call, and then he passed away shortly after that. So there were a lot of feelings I had about that project that I put away a little bit, like just kind of put it to the side to process and think about it. So I never really showed the work. I didn't really edit or deal with it. I just kind of did it as an act and then put it away. And then shortly after that, a woman by the name of Erin Hart in San Francisco stole my identity. And she used my license as a way to present, she would present my license when she would get caught for crimes. So she was a petty thief and a drug dealer, and she did all kinds of really interesting things with my identity. And I went through a lot of work, and it's a very long story, but I went through a lot of work to clear my name, about 9 months of work, including flying to court in Alameda County to defend myself in court. And it really struck me that this woman got away with something in my name, that felt unfair. And anyone who knows me knows that fairness is really, like, anything that's unfair, unjust is really, really hard for me to process. And I latch on and I kind of dig in and try to sort it out, sort of figure it out. And so this Erin Hart woman, I need to figure her out. And the more I learned about her, the more I realized that maybe there was kind of a version of me that I was seeing reflected a little bit, and that maybe she was making these decisions based on things I wasn't aware of. And anyway, the project ran its course and got quite a bit of press and notoriety. And through the press exposure, people in her life started coming forward to me and introducing themselves to me. And I learned more and more about her. And to this day, I still have people contacting me about her, wanting to tell me she didn't used to be this way, you know, friends who really cared about her and were estranged from her. And anyway, after I went through that process and kind of closed that case, I started thinking about, like you do, I guess, as an artist, like, what's my next thing? What am I doing? And I really wanted to pursue investigation as an art form or like a practice, but I didn't know if I didn't want to go on with Aaron Hart anymore. I didn't want to go on with my father. I didn't have my own mystery to solve anymore, which was fine by me. But I was hungry to sort of solve these problems. You know, I have plenty of mysteries, but none that I wanted to solve. So I came up with this idea that I really wanted to just, for myself, become a private investigator. And I met with my friend and gallery owner, Nancy Zestadil, who's here, and told her this idea after first like running it by my husband, who I trust a lot with my ideas. And he was like, that's a great idea, you should talk to Nancy about that. So I talked to Nancy and she was like, wait, what? Oh my gosh, you know, I don't remember exactly what the response was, but whatever it was, it basically encouraged me. Because there's these like two external people outside of my brain helping to validate, like, you could do that, that's a thing you could do. But I really started to take it seriously, and I had to process a little bit the first couple months of deciding I was going to do this. And unlike any other project, I decided to do it, and I instantly had a venue. And that made a really big difference. I don't know if you guys have experienced that ever, but when I had the venue in mind, which was Central Features Contemporary Art in Albuquerque, it was local, it was gallery owned and run by my friend who I really want to succeed, and is part of a scene and a community that I really want to be part of. And so it seemed really perfect. And so I really wanted to perfect, I wanted to become a really good private investigator. I don't know if I'm really quite there yet, but I realized after taking on now, I guess, over 35 clients over the past year and a half, not including myself. So I include myself as client 000, which is like Aaron Hart and No Trespassing. But I've taken on a number of other clients as well. And the work is evolving to sort of reveal to myself my interest in pursuing investigation is always sort of from this standpoint of empowering, so empowering myself, and now trying to work and facilitate others' empowerment in different ways. And that it takes a long time that took a long time for me to understand. But I realized where it came from at the root of it, and the focus of this desire to empower was because my father had attempted to kidnap me a number of times when he divorced my mom. And I didn't realize how much that impacted me. I really separated that as very personal. Like I did a whole 12-year William O. Kate, my 12-year project about my family. It was very personal. But that, to me, that detail was almost too personal, and I didn't go there. And I started to uncover that in No Trespassing, but then I backed off because it was really freaking me out. Did I remember this correctly? And there were all these things that were preventing me from sharing it, you know, in any kind of form that was open and public, because, I don't know, I was kind of protective of him and my mom and my sisters and what would they think if I revealed this, and anyway. So that happened, and I was about 11 or 12, so I had a pretty fragile developmental period, and it really, unfortunately, ended up creating this feeling of being watched all the time. And I never quite understood it, and so now I'm the watcher. And it feels really good, I gotta say.
Speaking of empowerment.
So I'm the watcher, and I've always been a watcher. As a photographer, I feel like we're all, always watching. I think as a culture now, we're watchers, and I'm really inspired by Arnie Svensson's work of the glass houses. No matter how you feel about it, I'm inspired by it. Sophie Cowell, of course, and her sort of weirdo inventions of problems to solve, and then also Mary Alpern's work, especially Dirty Windows, and photographs of illicit activity in private spaces or thought to be private spaces. So all of that over time has really built up this framework for me to kind of explore in my own way. Investigation as an art form, that art is investigation. And I was thinking about it, talking to Abby this afternoon over a drink. I was thinking, wow, we're investigators, we're artists, we're academics, we're creating, we're photographers, we're creating spaces for learning and curiosity for ourselves and also for other people. And I think that's empowering.
Thank you. Well, going back to the idea of investigation, I'd be interested in hearing from each of you about what role photography plays in that for you. The title of the last panel last week was The Power of Photography. This is ostensibly a photography exhibition, and each of you has used photography in a different way. So what do you feel are its special qualities that have drawn you to it, why you use it, and additionally, what is not enough about it that has brought you to handle it in a different way, in non-traditional ways? So, Abby, jump right in.
Me first?
Yes, you're
Okay.
nodding.
That'll teach you to nod.
She was nodding because she thought she was going to go second.
Yeah, I mean, the Transuranic series had to be done photographically. I think photography in particular, it's asking questions about truth and illusion. And for me, I'm not just asking questions about the nuclear industry, but I'm asking questions about photography as well, and the history of photography. And I think sometimes this kind of demand that photographs be seductive and grandiose and otherworldly. And when I set out to make the photographs of these places, I had immediately thought of people who had done work about toxic landscapes. And of course, many of them that immediately came to mind were men. But also I thought of a lot of aerial photography, and I thought about David Meisel's Black Maps. And it's beautiful, beautiful work. And I think sometimes like a beautiful photograph of a place can make somebody care. But I also think sometimes it can provide comfort in a way. And that's sort of what that series did for me. It was like he went on this grand expedition, and there's a certain like power and a privilege to that as well, to go somewhere far away and to photograph the place in a way where it seems to be contained, but it's also very visible. And I thought, gosh, that's not the toxic landscapes I know that are outside my door, that I drive by, that affect the water that I drink and the food that I eat. And so that was something challenging to me as well. And when I set out, of course, I said, the places were all sort of unremarkable in some way. And I think photography can fail in that way. And I thought, well, I have to do something different. I can't, make some kind of illusion or try to make these more beautiful than they are. Like sometimes the most horrifying things are just there in reality and in that banality. And a lot of these places, I spent hours trying to find. And when I found them, you just stumble upon a sign with a fence behind it. And I thought, well, that's great too, because signs aren't neutral. Signs suggest containment and transparency. And for, I would say, all of these sites, they don't have either. There's no real containment or transparency. And the big issue with all of these sites for me is that we're continuing to produce all this waste and we don't have anywhere to put it. There's no solution. WIP, of course, had a breach, the waste isolation pilot plant, in 2014, and couldn't accept waste for years, and so it's just piling up at these places, putting everybody at risk. And so photography sort of succeeds in some way, it falls short in a lot of ways. And that's where this process also comes in, to take something that's kind of quiet and to hopefully spin it.
You said that you had included the Geiger counters partly to make sure that element of fear was a little bit present, so that makes sense. What about the snow globes? There are snow globes.
Yeah, the snow globes I actually did a couple of years. I started doing them a couple of years after the Transuranic series. And I did them when one of my advisors in graduate school was like, all right, you're in your head and you kind of have this research-oriented practice. And she suggested that I just sit down and make and don't research and prepare and in all these crazy ways. And at the time, I had just lost my best friend of 11 years to cystic fibrosis. He grew up with me in Utah, and that wasn't a very good environment for his lungs. He moved away and had a double lung transplant that eventually failed. And so he passed away, and I was left thinking of these places that we lived together, and these things that had impacted us, and I was thinking a lot about nostalgia and material, and the way materials and objects change when somebody dies, our relationship to them, maybe things they owned or they shared with us, and thinking about that in terms of my art process. And I started reading this really wonderful book that I brought called Artificial Kingdom. And it is a book about the history of the snow globe. And I was really fascinated. I couldn't stop myself. But I was led down this road. And it talks a lot about nostalgia and our relationship to objects, evocative objects, and also to place, right? So snow globes came about after the Industrial Revolution, and they often had a lot of them at national parks, right? People would go and they really desire to take something away to remember that experience at a national park. And I thought, what would today's nostalgic object be? What would it be? What do we live around that would be nostalgic in some way? And for me, in some bizarre place in my head, I have a weird love for the industrial landscape. I'm fearful of it, and I also love it. They're like my temples. And I thought, well, that's what it would be. It would be all of these industrial sites. And so I started making these, and I think the process was healing. It was also less intense than the work that I was making. I was using my hands. They're totally irreverent and inappropriate.
Especially in Texas.
Yes. So there was that fun, kind of quirky strangeness to them that was pleasing, but also criticizing.
Whimsical yet transgressive.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Cara, what would you say about the way you've chosen to print and present your work, and how here's one of the snow globes.
Oil drilling.
And you can ask her more about this later. There's some interesting information about how some of the objects in them were constructed.
And the big ones play music.
Yes, they do. Mostly political music. Yes.
I started in black and white film in '98, and I studied under a protest photographer named Bill Thomas, who really emphasized content. And I was at the University of Houston, and it was my senior year. So I was in Texas as a Native person that had grown up on a reservation and went to school for cultural anthropology, and everything was taught as if myself and this entire experience didn't exist. Everything was in the past. And everybody was saying what they say to 21-year-old, what are you going to do with that degree? And I was just absolutely enamored with Bill and the process, and I had always kind of been an artist but never really been encouraged to do it, and I fell in love with black and white film, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a contemporary documentary of living natives, and I set out to do that in black and white film. And I came here to the Institute of American Indian Arts in 1999 to study more black and white film after my first degree. And back then, what was Native American photography? You start by emulating what's out there, and that was Curtis. And so there was a lot of figurative landscapes, a lot of black and white, a lot of sepia, even coming out of the school. And that was kind of my voice then, but I was trying to, make it contemporary, and it wasn't working. And I continued on in school. Everything had kind of switched over to digital at that point, and it required more schooling. So I jumped into that learning process, and I was in art school much longer than my family would have ever wanted me to be in art school, but it was a good decision. And so what you see now is kind of a collision of fine art and commercial and studio lighting, and hey, we're living, it's in color. It's in living color, and they're big, and this is a contemporary experience of Native women. Even my other bodies of work are predominantly color. Every once in a while, a photograph lends itself to black and white, and I think that's fine aesthetically, but I'm kind of known for working in color and working in large scale.
Yeah, it feels like you're presenting them in living color, as the phrase goes.
It's kind of larger than life.
Vivid,
Right.
larger than life, that's right. A little bit of heroines
Yep.
in some way. And
When I do make an edition, I do a limited edition of 5 big ones of each piece, and then I do a smaller edition of 25 fine art editions, and that allows 2 different price points. One that typically non-natives can't afford, and the other one is so that my own community can go home with the art as well. And that's how that's kind of the mechanics of what's going on in my head behind the scenes. I give back to the models and their families, prints, pay my models,
Nice.
all of those types of things. And again, friends and family, it kind of takes away the exploitive nature of photography. So I'm really trying to do something for my community, for each person that I photograph.
I think the addition of the commercial kinds of qualities in the work really amps it up and makes them who they are. It's almost like they're in a magazine. It glamorizing isn't the right word, because that sounds like a negative.
I think it kind of reverses the lens, and it's kind of saying, it's not about a glimpse into our culture always. It's also a glimpse into saying we understand, the mainstream, the dominant culture. And if it's shot with fashion lighting, it's done purposely. Like, this is our high fashion, or if it's done in a certain way, it's done purposely.
It just gives them a little extra edge. Jessie, do you want to talk a little bit about your installation next door? You have worked, you decided to show photographic prints, video, and do an installation, and also some performances.
Yeah,
Performances
I've
and
been
plays
off
are
a lot. Yeah, I've been off a lot.
But what's your relationship to photography, I guess, which is essentially where you started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm asking that myself like every day, pretty much.
Migrated.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, my relationship with photography is pretty fraught right now, pretty contentious. I study photography at private art schools and have the debt to show for it, but I also have the skill and the desire and the love for the medium. And I was joking actually earlier with Abby. I was like, yeah, I'm an expert in sea printing. What does that mean? Like, what is that? Like, what do I do with that? And so it was 1999. I graduated from RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, where I really they really train you in the chemistry and the physics and the light and all of the technical skills. And I remember driving away from Rochester to move to San Francisco to go to grad school, and literally just sighing a big sigh of relief and holding my Holga camera on my lap, and then my pinhole back and being like, I don't need a Hasselblad, I don't need a Sinar, I don't need, because everything was so much about the lens you had and the money that you spent on your Canon. I made my way through both degrees with a Pentax K1000. And that wasn't out of my choice, that was out of, that's what I had, that's what was there. To work with, I shot on Kodak Gold 100, 35mm, and I made 50 by 70 inch prints from that, I made 30 by 40 prints from that, and they held up. There was only a little bit of grain. They held up, and I really prided myself on that technical expertise, and then slowly it just started to feel like a little bit out of grasp, or so my email is filmnotdead@gmail.com. I just really still hold on to that to some degree, and I'm not sure how much of that is fetishization or how much of that is holding on to nostalgia of how I learned photography.
You realize that Abby put a photographer in one of the snow globes, don't you?
I didn't know that. I didn't see that.
Nostalgia, obsolescence.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that. So then I spent the first 12 years of my adult career as an artist photographing my family in a project called Catastrophe, Crisis, and Other Family Traditions. And the title really says it all. And so if you wanted to look at that a little deeper, you could check out my website. But the summary of it is that I grew up really, like I said, I grew up with my mom and dad, and then my dad left when I was 11. And when he left us in poverty and homelessness and destitution. And I grew up through my teenage years with no access to, most of the time, no access to running water, electricity, traveling from place to place as a nomad, and upstate New York. And so it felt like I knew that was a normal, because I hadn't grown up that way for my childhood, but I also knew that this is what I was facing. And my dad had left me when he left, literally the day he left with all his possessions out of our house, left me with a point and shoot film camera. And I used that to document my life, but my life as I wanted it to be. So I was photographing up trees and getting these different angles on mushrooms and different things in my life. And then when I went away to college, it's a really long story, but basically there were all these series of catastrophes and crises that were happening in my life. And my brother was a victim of a severe fire, and he was like a son to me, and I had left to go to college and left him behind at home. And so I was really feeling as a 19-year-old oh, I did this to my brother. And so I documented him for an assignment in class. And everyone showed up to the class with pictures of stop signs and flowers and brightly colored cars and things. And I'm like, so this is my Korean brother who never mind, I'm white, he's Korean, let's not talk about that, but that he has these severe fire injuries, and he's in the process right now in intensive care unit, and I was very matter of fact about it, and showed the pictures, and everyone was it was like a critique. They were like, no magenta. They don't see magenta. Skin tone looks really good. And my professor at the time, Dan Larkin, I will never forget, he was like, after class, he's like, you have something really powerful going on in your life and something to say, and you should never shy away from that. And I really took it to heart. I don't know if anybody knows how much that impacted me. And then later on, I met with really famous figurative photographer Jock Sturges. I just happened to have a slot with him in a critique, and I showed him these naked lady pictures I was taking in black and white and trying to be Edward Weston, and they were terrible. And he was like, well, what's this little book over here? And I was like, oh, no, that's my private, whatever, in my studio. And he looked through it, and there were all the pictures of my brother, and he was like, yeah, you're gonna need to go to grad school, you're gonna need to make a book, you're gonna need, and he was really matter of fact. And I was like, okay. And so I launched into photography, and I launched into getting a grad degree. But in this most recent iteration of my work, and as life has kind of gone on, photography remains my primary tool, but I've sort of come up against this failure of communication with the ideas I'm trying to express. And I think that the reason for that is that I'm no longer after this singular powerful image anymore, as respectful as I am of these singular powerful images that photographers are producing. It felt like a futile effort. I felt like no singular image I could make was going to be the shining example of what I was trying to say. And so I kept feeling like I was getting up against the same model. I was trying to fit into the sort of photo, I was going to photo fairs and touring my work and getting reviewed, and all of it was very valuable, but I really just ended my last time at Center doing the Center reviews. I think it's a fabulous opportunity, and I would probably do it again. But the last one I did, I was like, I'm just gonna perform at these reviews. And so I went and I performed. I didn't even show any photographs. I just sat and performed and talked about my work. And then I got an opportunity from that to be on This American Life, and it was just, from there on, I was like, I don't need to be a photographer. I can be an artist and use photography. And so that's my relationship right now with photography.
Yeah, and obviously it was a really important tool in terms of your connection to surveillance and surveilling and.
Oh
and
yeah, you
that's-
picked the right answer. I'm sorry, you're right.
No, that's great.
That was the answer.
I'm just trying to contribute. I can like insert something.
I see. You're right. Go on.
Right. And of course with surveillance images, it
Right.
isn't just one. Well, there's
Right.
sometimes and incriminating, but it's kind of this flow of observational moments.
Well, there isn't the smoking gun. Like, I can't keep doing cheater cases. I'm just gonna put it out there. Like, because there isn't, the answer is not gonna be the one the person wants to hear. The client is not gonna wanna hear that answer. And they can find someone to find that answer for them if they want, but there isn't gonna be that definitive image. There may be. Mary Alpern might be able to find, but
The idea of hiring somebody who would give me an answer to something that I did want.
so that's what
Is that
I
person
mean. Yeah,
out
so
there?
I can do that. So if you have a problem that you want the answer, you tell me what you want as an answer and I'll make it for
How
you.
much does that cost?
Yeah, easy. We'll work something out. Yeah, no, I mean, surveillance is very tricky, it isn't like a definitive, it's so sexy to watch Law and Order. I love Lenny Briscoe. I love that he sits there and he watches, or Saul, Better Call Saul. And, what is my favorite character's name? The guy who is a private investigator.
Audience?
Breaks his arm. Yeah, Mike, thank you. I love that idea that you could have this cinematic moment where they're watching for maybe 30 seconds and then the thing happens and you're going. That never happens. Never happens. There's lots of figuring out when you're gonna pee and how you're gonna pee, and there's lots of drinking coffee and then realizing why did I drink that coffee, and then you figure out how to eat and what do I look conspicuous? What time of day is it? All of that, and just watching. Not one single photograph is taken. And so a lot of the work you see in No Trespassing are the photographs of the in-between. So I would be sitting observing and then I would notice the moon, or I would notice a raccoon, or up here, there's a photograph. And so it's not my dad, but so yeah, then that's when again, photography was feeling. And it really came clear to me the power of photography for me and what a strong photograph was to me in the context of the whole. In the exposure I got through Dear and Heart, there was this one blog that had a story about my work that they had been, it was Borrow Lenses, and they had supported, I had borrowed lenses from them. And so, I don't know if they made that connection, but they had put the story on their blog, and these photographers really wanted to rail into the quality of the photographs. And the photographs were grainy, they were shot on 3200, they were purposefully shot with a long lens, they were supposed to look crappy, they were supposed to look like
You were sitting in a
surveillance,
car.
yeah, like that beautiful image that Robert Capra took of, with the grain, and yeah, so they were supposed to be this sort of fallible, but then I learned, I was just don't read the comments, they don't really know what photography can be. It's a document, it's not a perfect set lit.
It's not an exhibition print kind of idea. It's not
Well, that's the struggle I
it's not
have.
an individual masterpiece.
Maybe not, I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe not,
complicated.
we'll see, yeah, I mean, that's one thing I feel really constrained by is a market and thinking about a market, but I also really love the commercial world, and so I'm interested, it's a challenge for me, so I think about how could a bad image be marketable?
Mhm, mhm.
I don't know, I mean, not that your images are bad, but there's like a banality,
Next question.
there's like a banality to your images that I really like. I get the point, you know, you were saying the point is that they're quiet, but that there's fear inherent in them, you know? And I think that's really important, that the aura of the piece is more, it surpasses the communicate, like it communicates more than just looking at the image and knowing it's like, oh, okay, that's a nuclear waste site, next, okay, but you know, like, that it's something more, you know, beneath the surface. Yeah.
There's a lot to say on that topic, and we could keep going. I have one more question I'm holding in abeyance before we go to audience questions, but do you all want to discuss that a little more, or are you happy to carry on?
No, you're not.
Okay, we'll carry on. This is a tough one to end with, so, but so we'll save the hardest for last. One of the organizing principles of this exhibition is Women in New Mexico, who use photography as a tool for social awareness or action. How do you envision the artist's role in relationship to that? Obviously, there are a lot of photographs that are taken in a journalistic context, things that are taken to specifically for you know, activist purposes or to illustrate things that are going on in the world. You three are working as artists and are showing work in a gallery. What can an artist contribute to that conversation, or how do you feel about that? What can art do that maybe is a little bit different from some of the other uses of photography or images?
I think I spoke to my experience with that a little bit before, but particularly my female figuratives were a call and response. And I can remember seeing, you know, we pay attention, you know, the web has been unbelievable for the Native community. It's the first time we're able to see accurate depictions of ourselves, that we're interacting from isolated, remote, rural locations. So it's been this like whole new world over the past decade. And simultaneously we're also posting like bad practices, you know, that's coming from the non-native world. You see a lot of cultural appropriation, you're seeing a lot of lowbrow stuff, you're seeing like a lot of pop-up shaman classes, things like that. And you know, we're having these conversations within Native communities like, look, this is really effed up, you know, look at Heidi Klum on the runway in her headdress and her panties, like how offensive is this? Look at, you know, what Urban Outfitters did and made Navajo panties, like how messed up is that? You know, so you have this like small, maybe lesser seen outrage from the Native community without like the major media platforms that the mainstream society has. And out of this series, the first one was Nikki over there. And I think when I saw some of those images, you know, yes, I understand the offense, but there was part of me as a photographer that was like, damn, but they're really good. Like, they're really beautiful. And so I was like, how do you do this correctly? So that was kind of like what I was speaking to as far as like call and response. Like, how do I do a female figurative of a Native woman that's going to be really controversial, but how do I do it in a way that's very well thought out, that's very empowering, that's not hypersexual, that's not offensive to our own community, that maybe broaches on taboos, all of those types of things. And so it was really hard. I mean, we were having conversations around the house and like, well, what do you think about this? And the guys were like, you can't do that. You know? And I was like, but everybody, but other natives are. You know, that was the reality, is non-native people from outside the community were. And that's maybe not quite the jump for why I had to do it, but I really felt like there's a problem to solve, right? And so it was just kind of like my small way of responding to something. You know, if you want to have beauty and you want to be portrayed accurately, can it be my responsibility as a photographer to do it and do it well, especially with Native women, where I don't think it is for the large part done well, or respectfully, or maternally, or from within the culture. We're crossing the digital divide. That's another big deal. We're from low socioeconomic, underprivileged communities. A lot of us still aren't online. A lot of us certainly can't afford fancy cameras. So what happens when you have one? Do you have a responsibility to your community? I think so. So I think a lot of my, especially my female figuratives, are kind of what you're talking about, that calm response, to being responsible to my community, for providing a platform for accurate depiction, you know, authentic, contemporary, living, in color.
Can I just ask a question? Do you see the accurate depiction, like the driving force behind it, for your models primarily, for you, or for like non-Native folks and non-Native communities?
I think everything that I do is for my own community first. So, you know, Indian Market will be my next show in August, and my community, my Native community, likes my photographs. It's like they see them and they see what I'm doing. You know, they see playfulness, they see humor, they see things that they haven't seen before but they wanted to see. You know, all of those things that I was talking about, whether it's high fashion, whether it's high contrast, whether it's, you know, capturing hair that we see in all these magazines. I mean, here we are within mainstream culture, but we're not depicted. And if we're not depicted that way, you know, which is a truth to our reality, but when you do see us depicted, it's often not this way, you know, so it's just kind of like bridging that gap of reality.
So really making visible from your own perspective.
I think so, and I think to answer your question specifically, I think everything I do is for my community first, and within our own vernacular and vocabulary and understanding and ways of knowing and sense of humor, and then it's kind of a ripple effect, and it's appreciated. I think not everybody really see it as for what it is. It's really fun, and it's really, you know, tangible. It's a really tangible feeling, and it's inviting. It's an all invitational format. How's that?
Well, one of the things you take from the fashion world that I see in these pictures is that you know, people are really putting themselves out there. So it's confrontational in a way, but so there are people who are really standing their ground and inviting people to look at them. But you're doing it on your own terms, in a sense.
On their terms.
I think what's really fun is that none of them are professional models.
Yes. Jesse, do you want to talk a little bit about this body of work? I'm not sure how that fits so well into the idea of social change or advocacy, or
Really?
maybe you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to believe that I'm challenging a sort of gender norm around who gets to be behind the camera and who gets to fetishize equipment, frankly. Like, who gets to shoot a gun, who gets to arm themselves or not, and what kind of work I get to do. And I've always really known I have a very masculine side of myself, and I've really tried to honor that. It can be really confusing and a real, you know, binary in culture. And so there's always, like, I've always been a tomboy, and I've always been, you know, dress and costume and fashion has always been very fraught for me, but I've also been intrigued and interested. So all of that kind of plays out for me very on a personal level in this work, and that happens in the car by myself, that happens when I'm interviewing a client, that happens when I'm following someone. And so I feel like in those moments, I'm performing for myself and I'm performing for the project. And the documentation is really, again, a failed communication in a lot of ways that I'm not sure I'm trying to fix the failed communication. We'll see in the next iteration of this, but it more and more has become that I'm empowering myself to do this. And part of my decision to pursue a private investigator's license literally and start an LLC and take it seriously as a business decision was that I wasn't feeling really respected in the academic world, quite honestly. And I felt it was a result of my gender, and that I had gone through a lot of really painful professional experiences, and I wanted to have an escape hatch, and I created that for myself. And I love my job at UNM. I love teaching my students. I really enjoy the work I do there. I also was feeling like there was something very male-dominated about that institution, that I feel like I'm making a choice to participate in. And as long as I was making that choice, as long as I continue to be able to make that choice, and this is very personal, I don't think that this is something that's gonna come across in the work, but I feel like by pursuing the investigator's license and getting the license, there aren't that many female PIs. There are some, but there aren't as many, certainly, as men. And I just felt like it was, for me, I get to do this, I get to make this choice, and if it works as an art project, that's great, and I'm really happy, and I hope that it does for the galleries that have backed me and partnered with me. I hope that it's successful in that way. But it's, no matter what, it's successful because I'm making money doing something I love and something that I feel like I'm empowering myself, and then hopefully the clients that I'm working with, there's a symbiotic empowerment as well. So it's a very big risk for me because I don't know if it's art, and I don't really mind that space of discomfort. I don't mind being unclear on where I stand with it. I just know I love doing it, and I'm happy that galleries continue to agree to show it, and I'll keep doing that because I really enjoy that world. I enjoy this world a lot, and taking things apart in an academic and also on the other side, personal way. But it's like my way of doing what I do and I want to do. So in that way, I guess, just being able to tell my stories and tell other people's stories in different ways, and through empowerment, and being able to use empathy in a really empowering way, because empathy is not a valued attribute in academia, certainly, and in our male-dominated society, patriarchy. I think empathy is really frowned upon, but I'm very empathetic, and I feel like I see the world through a lens of compassion. I try to, and so I feel like if this is a space I can do that and do it successfully and be respected for it, then I found my thing.
Yeah, it feels like you had a little bit of a critical response to that academic world, and decided to make something different.
Yeah, that's part of it, for sure. Thank you.
Abby, what would you say in terms of being an artist and working on subject matter that is really intended to bring people's attention to one of the world's problems? Is that a really useful voice to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Just say it.
Shake it, baby, shake it.
Yeah, see, doesn't that feel good? It's
Feels
like the
pretty good.
hand of God that comes down.
It's empowering.
Yeah, it is.
I feel very empowered.
I mean, I think art gives us a really safe space to kind of enter and talk about really difficult, challenging, overwhelming, complex things going on in our society. So it makes the most sense for me to speak about these through this avenue. But it's also like a kind of investigative tool. And in doing work on nuclear issues, in the beginning I had a lot of questions. Like the camera was just a means for me to explore and try to figure out and answer questions for myself. And I actually came to this very strong epiphany after attempting to be really neutral for a long time. And it happened when I was learning about this kind of world radiation dose limits for exposure to radiation. And these dose limits are actually set by a reference man. So it's a 25 to 30-year-old Caucasian male. They determine like what is the kind of limit that a 25 to 30-year-old Caucasian male can handle. And that's what everything is set to in the world, right? Like, we're trying to limit below this. And
he never ages.
no. But there was something really striking to me with that, in that language, because it meant that in documentation, little girls are a subpopulation. They're a subpopulation, they're not the future. And that's really scary because women and children are at far greater risk of suffering the effects of radiation because of developing reproductive organs and things like that. And to me, that was it. There was like nothing I could move past that. It was like, wow, I'm second-class citizen. And what does that mean for future generations? And if I care about future generations, if I care about people who inhabit the planet after me, I have to make some kind of stance on this. And it changed my work, it changed the way I talked about my work. And I said, well, I don't care if I don't get let into a nuclear plant or whatever, like I'm ready to kind of deny myself that access if it means having integrity and saying, hey, I realize like we have no answers for these things. You can't, which is happening right now, build new plants when you have nowhere to put the waste, right? We're in a nuclear renaissance right now. So for the first time in 30 years, we're building new nuclear plants. Nowhere to put the waste. It's crazy to me. And so that, like, as a woman, I feel like really informs my work. And I think there was a question about kind of the socio-political, I think Cara brought up like a wonderful point about all the work in here. I feel like there's so much integrity that each artist has with their subjects, with their subject matter, the purpose of the work. And I love that you have these different price points, and that you're kind of conscious of that to give back to your own community. And I think that's a challenging thing to make kind of provocative work and say, how is this going to function? Because we're also artists and we have to eat. That's just the truth. And so with making Transuranic, I'm trying to figure out how do I show this kind of provocative, challenging work, and how does it function, and how do I pay for it to continue travel as it has the last few years. And originally I was like, well, I have to sell some of the prints. There's 13 originals, and each one has $300 or $400 worth of uranium in it alone, right? So they're very expensive. They're extremely rare. But at some point I realized I can't sell the originals. They have to go somewhere that can continue to teach and educate the community. And every print below it, they're very indexical. It has the name of the place and the amount in hundreds of gallons of radioactive waste that has been transported from that place to WIP. So, I created prints from the originals, and the originals are promised to some other exhibitions, and then I'll donate them to the New Mexico History Museum for them to kind of show and educate people with. And that's my hope, is that they continue to speak and provoke, even if that's just something like tiny, this tiny little tweak that makes people maybe question the place that they live and the future that we want for ourselves.
I think the questioning is important, and the idea of not necessarily showing what's good and what's bad, but saying this is where we are, and how could things be, how can we go forward.
Art, on that note, art making kind of reminds me of some of the philosophies behind meditation, and especially transcendental meditation, of like this idea of like a ripple, and like if you have a thought and you're thinking about things in a certain way, that ripples out, and then if your colleague or your friends and your other fellow artists, like we're all kind of having these conversations in these forums in different places, and then that consciousness is, I mean, I believe is like rippling out, and then people here who heard talk about this and didn't know about some of the things that we're talking about might then go and talk to someone else and talk to someone else, and you just hope that you're helping to contribute to that general awareness of the value of the subject you're exploring, but also of art itself and the importance of art, you know, in our culture. I think just that, I tell my students, you making a choice to make art is political, actually. I really believe that, just making the art. It doesn't have to be political in nature or subject, but it is a political act now, I believe that. And I didn't always believe that, but I think that that's part of it, you know.
And I feel strongly as a museum person that art and places that show art are places where people stop what they're doing with any luck at all and look. And that gives an opening for contemplation and reconsideration and who knows what good ideas. Well, what about the audience? Are there things you are wanting to ask? And
Oh, I just have one.
Go ahead.
Cara, do you see yourself as part of a community of artists who are providing an antidote to the cliches? I'm thinking of Will Wilson out at the community college. Austin Begay, I think is his name, who does those beautiful paintings of the guys up on the res hanging out in the pool hall. Those depictions of real life as an antidote to what we get a whole lot of, way too much of romanticized noble warriors, et cetera, paintings of what, here in Santa Fe, of blonde Hollywood women with their faces painted up in Day of the Dead, you know, paintings. You know, that whole, if you will, that whole appropriation of other cultures that is really strong in the white affluent community. Do you see yourself working with other artists who are from that culture to try to balance that?
Yes, there's a big group of what we would say are contemporary Native artists that I think are trying to do exactly that. But at the same time, I think it's really important to acknowledge that in Native culture, we're a slow growth culture. That we pass down for thousands and thousands of years vocabulary, vernacular, traditional ecological knowledge, ways of being, ways of knowing, ways of doing art. And you know, there's great diversity within all the tribes that some are bound to their traditional arts. And we need that as Native peoples. We need that really strong so I just want to address that what people may consider cliche may be a very important part of our culture that is traditional. At the same time, there are contemporary artists that are compelled, like each artist is compelled by different meanings to say, we're living here today, you know, we don't look or act, you know, like we did 200 years ago. I think it's really important to let youth know, particularly Native youth, that we're not a stagnant culture. So I think it takes a both and approach. I think it does take countering, that's the only part of Native culture that exists, but in fact, that part exists.
Okay.
You know, and it's very, very important to even me as a contemporary artist that we have traditional artists that are continuing on traditions that are not cliche at all, you know, that are actually the heart of who we are, you know, that allow us to be what we are and allow us to grow from that, you know, really strong culture. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. I was my major, well, one of my things was how do you all take that back and take it out of, if you will, it's very dominant in the white culture with white artists, and I think that was one of my points too. How do you all take that back and get it back into your culture as opposed to some guy in Indiana painting Indian warriors?
Well, we do have the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. So nobody's allowed to represent themselves as a Native artist. It's actually a felony to represent yourself as a Native artist. Yeah, I think some people are definitely either battling that stereotype or owning that stereotype. You know, I think a lot of my work is trying to like own some of it and take it back and say, you know, like I was saying, this is how you do it right if you're gonna do it. You know, I think that that's, you know, a real voice behind some of my photography, and I think that that's really important to battle cultural appropriation and battle stereotypes that people have.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about photography not being one of the traditional arts, is that it kind of opens up a new place for conversation. I think that's a really interesting growing area right now.
And film.
Film as
Film
well.
is definitely moving film.
And music.
Other questions?
I just kept thinking about the two of you sitting next to each other, and I was thinking about the Chemehuevi battle against the Ware Valley plant the whole time, and I was like, you guys need to do a project together. And then I kind of lost track of it in about the year 2000, so I don't even know what happened, but
We won.
yeah. Anyway, so but I just and I'm looking at this, especially this image right here, this woman sitting on the earth, you know, and I was thinking about how, you know, like Ware Valley being a perfect example, and I lived most of my life in southern Arizona, and you know, it's just like continual with, hey, let's take a sacred spot, not just any spot, but let's take a sacred spot and bury our nuclear waste. And I come from a background of the nuclear industry myself that I grew up in. So, you know, I mean, it's like all very much embedded in my head, and so I'm just sitting here watching the two of you, and I'm like writing a film or something. I just need to get together. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important in this day and age because we're kind of, you know, hit from colonialism, and I'm sure in your work you find a lot of environmental racism. And so, you know, Indigenous peoples are stewards of 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, and where else are they going to put it? They're going to put it in the backyard of people of color. And so that's why you're seeing things like Standing Rock and Ware Valley before that. And, you know, we're fighting the battles on behalf of all of humanity, but it's because we're stewarding these last biodiverse places on Earth. And because they're low population, I know there's a word for that, but because they're low population, people are like, oh, there's nothing there, nobody's gonna be upset. But you're definitely finding major cultural resources, underground water, the list goes on and on, sacred sites.
And it's happening right now with uranium mines spilling into the Grand Canyon and all the native population around there that can't drink their water. Yeah, so it's a huge issue.
Yes. Go ahead.
Jessamyn, I have a question for you. In the beginning, you had said that after your father left, it was kind of kept a secret, and then you were kind of thinking of being courageous and coming out with that. And how did your family members take it, and how did that affect you?
That my father left. So my father leaving was definitely not a secret. His attempts, some of the behaviors and some of the things that he did, the way that he was really ugly, and there were just things that as an 11-year-old I observed and knew and was privy to that like my sisters and brother were not. And I guess I felt like, and still feel like, it's kind of like a responsibility to keep those stories, you know? They know that there was like a period where we went to Canada and my mom framed it as a trip, and then we moved to a house that he didn't have the address to, there was no forwarding address, like there was that consciousness in our family, there had to be, we were like hiding from him. But my sisters had a different relationship with him because of their different understanding And my mom, you know, she and I knew a lot more because we were supporting each other, honestly, through that period.
And were you the oldest?
Yeah, I'm the oldest. Yeah, so I kind of became like a de facto co-parent in some ways by default, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it was a lot more responsibility than I think a young person should have, but it was also just the nature of the situation and how things unfolded. And I've made peace with a lot of that. My mom and I are very close. And I was, like, just for the record, I was estranged from my father by choice, whereas my sisters were in touch with him. So that was kind of an interesting, and that's been a real difficult thing in my relationship with my sisters in some ways, and we've been working through it and talking about it. But I also feel a responsibility not to tell them all the details, that frankly some of them are a little fuzzy for me anyway. So I feel like sometimes you don't have to know all of the things, you know, and I like the idea that they were sad that he passed away in a different way than I was. I think that that's really special for them, that they get to have that in a sort of parental way, maybe a little bit.
To kind of let everybody have their own memories and relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we all make our own reality, you know, we really do. And that to me is one of the feelings of photography, but also the lovely, beautiful opportunities of photography, which is why so many of my photographs are not cited where and when, and some of the dates are actually incorrect on purpose. And a lot of the record keeping I have is very loose, and I'm creating stories that maybe are different than a story I told. So I'm creating a narrative, but it's ever changing because our memories are ever changing. And yeah, I could go on and on about that, but I'll leave it there.
Well, I want to thank our fabulous artists. It was really wonderful to work with all three of you.
Thank you.
And I know they will be here for a few minutes if you have other things that you want to talk with them about. And thanks for joining us.